Oh, he would be interested. He used to be a jockey. Horse racing, and he had a twin brother, and they're in the Guinness Book of World Records.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because they both were in races. One was in England and he was somewhere here in the States. And I think they were riding the same number of horses and they had all the same syllables. But he had an identical twin brother. This guy's really, who never knows.
Yeah, I go get up my chair.
So we can just. Why not? Just to be a bit.
I could have checked.
Oh, no, I don't.
I thought probably the same thing. Yes. Yeah, that's good.
Well, just so you don't.
Mine won't connect. Do you have,
I noticed,
can you see if it's connected? Mine won't connect, I don't know why.
this has to be present. Knew you were much.
I tried to.
And we're in real good shape.
Is it showing? We're live? Okay. If it's showing, we're good. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the way it is. You don't have everything you need on.
Okay, we're gonna get started here in 1 minute.
Yeah, it's a whole yard out, so I'm happy with that.
So he was still lower than most of the.
Oh, okay, that's.
It was 7%.
But how many, you know that? I don't know.
Okay, before we get started, as usual, I'd like to emphasize speak slowly and into the mic. All right, we're gonna start with our committee meetings. This is Barwin City Council committee meetings. And first up is City Parks, City Properties, Parks and Recreation with Mr. Hyde.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to call the order of City Properties, Parks and Recreation, Monday, November 16th, 2020, 6 p.m. at that Active Adult Center. All members are present. Everybody noted on my list. We have no requests for legislation. And for miscellaneous discussion, I have from the director, the Lake Anna Christmas lights will be turned on over Thanksgiving weekend. They'll remain lit Sunday through Sunday, January 3rd. They'll be turned on at 5 p.m. and remain on until 9 p.m. Sunday through Thursday and 10 o'clock Fridays, Saturdays, and holidays. That's all I have. Is there anything else from the committee? Anything else from the body? All right, hearing nothing, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Thank you. And we are adjourned at 6:02.
Okay, next up is Public Welfare and Safety, Mrs. DeBette.
Today is Monday, November 16th, 2020, 6:03 p.m. here in the Active Adult Center. I'd like to bring to order Public Welfare and Safety. All members of the committee are present, as well as all council members and all others noted. We have two pieces of legislation that we will be voting on this evening from safety. The first one is ordinance number 137-2020, and the title is enacting the Code of Ordinances. It is an ordinance enacting a Code of Ordinances for the city of Arlington, revising, amending, restating, codifying, and compiling certain existing general ordinances of the political subdivision dealing with subjects embraced in such Code of Ordinances. Does anyone have any questions about this? This is a process that we started quite a while ago, and we are receiving the finished work. Okay. The next piece of legislation we will be voting on this evening is ordinance number 138-2020, and it is titled Transfer of Property, Christian Healthcare Ministries, Inc. And what is this?
I was gonna say, that's.
That's not mine.
No, that's
I'm
not.
like, wait a minute, yeah, that's not mine, that's Parks. It's
Whoops.
on my agenda, but it's definitely Parks.
Sorry.
That's okay. Well, since he, in the spirit of Mr. Hyde already adjourning his Parks meeting, does anyone have any questions about this piece of legislation, to, ask Mr. Hyde? We'll be voting on it this evening. Okay, hearing none. We also have a couple of requests for legislation. The first one is a letter from Chief Morber requesting legislation to scrap or salvage 24 vehicles from the tow yard. Does anyone have any questions about this piece of legislation? Do I have a motion to call for it?
I'll make a motion.
Motion made by Mr. Greer,
Second.
second by Mr. Griffin. On favor? Aye. The second request is, made by Chief Pursley, and it's a letter from Chief Pursley to appropriate $31,079 from the unappropriated fund of the general fund to the fire department capital fund of the general fund for the purchase of a complete air handling system. So, the fire department needs to replace Station 1's 3 HVAC units with the added features of an ionization air purifier system and smoke duct detectors. The current system is 25 years old, and the refrigerant has been phased out. They're adding the ionization air purifier system to Station 2's HVAC system, specifically because it has shown to reduce infectious disease pathogens, including COVID. We would like to have emergency wording because it will maintain a healthy workforce as cases begin to rise. Does anyone have any questions about this piece of legislation? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. General question about the funds, where they're coming from. Is any of this CARES Act money?
I would guess yes, but I can't speak for them.
No?
No, it is not. When Chief Pursley brought this to my attention, we were thinking we could use it. And it could very well be used for CARES Act. Well, CARES Act money could be used for it. However, one of the webinars that I sat on, they kind of frown upon capital improvements such as an HVAC system and that. So it's going into that gray area that I really don't want the city to tread in, and we end up with an audit finding or something, because they may view this more as a general, more of a routine thing, kind of, since it's replacing something that's 25 years old. They might view it as you were gonna need to replace it anyways, and you're just trying to get around having to use your own money type thing. So it's kind of one of those gray areas that I don't feel comfortable, the city going in. And we will still be able to use all the CARES Act money up. So we'll be all right, I think. So I'll not think, we'll be okay with that, so.
Right, thank you. I just brought that up because it mentioned COVID-19 and for the ionization air purifier. Also, assuming that we have a dollar amount, did we get a quote from a company? Which company?
So, we actually got 3 quotes. Received a quote from Jennings Heating and Cooling, Gardner, and the quote that we are going with is from Air Comfort. They were the lower of the 3. They were also the vendor that has been servicing our units for, geez, I don't know, for ever since I can remember. So, but yes, we did get 3 quotes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions? Do I have a motion to call for this piece of legislation?
I'll make a motion.
Motion made by Mr. Greer, second by Mr. Griffin. All in favor? Aye. And this passes. Do we have any miscellaneous discussion? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Motion made by Mr. Griffin, Mr. Greer,
Second.
second by Mr. Griffin. We are adjourned at 6:09.
Okay, next up is Rural Marketing and Development, Mr. Griffin.
Thank you, Mr. President. Rules Marketing and Development, I would like to call this meeting to order today, November 16th. We are meeting remotely and in the Active Adult Center, all members present and all others noted. Tonight, we have one request for legislation. And it's a late request, resolution number 146-2020, titled Extended House Bill. And what that's about is urging the governor of the wine and Ohio legislator to extend the deadline for operating public meetings virtually and electronically. It was supposed to expire December 1st. We want to make sure we keep going with the numbers and stuff. So I'll need a motion to call for revoke Council Rule 702 to suspend Council Rule 302.
I'll make that motion to suspend or invoke the Rule 702 to suspend Rules 302, 304, and 401.
Okay, thank you. Sam,
I'll second that.
all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passed on suspension of the rules. Do I have a motion to call for this legislation?
Mr. Chair, if I may on it, I did read in the piece of legislation here, it refers to Senate Bill 365. I did read into that. It's only about 3 pages long. That bill that's been introduced by Senator Fedor, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, that amends that deadline to not expire until the state of emergency expires. So they won't have to come back at it again until the emergency is completely over. But I will make a motion to call for it.
Thank you. Second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passed. Do we have any, this piece of legislation was passed and called for. Do we have any miscellaneous discussion or anything, remarks? Hearing none, make a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
And I'll second it, sir.
Okay, we are adjourned at 6:12.
Okay, next up is city utilities and Mrs. Colbert.
Thank you, Mr. President. City utilities are meeting in the Active Adult Center. It's November 16th. It is 6:13. Our current legislation, we have two ordinances, number 134, 2020, titled Mitigation Assistance Designee for Arthur Street. And the ordinance number 135, 2020, titled Mitigation Assistance Designee for 15th Street Northwest. Do you have any questions about those two pieces of legislation? Those are assigning the people to handle those like we did with 14. Hearing none, we'll move on. We have a request for legislation, a letter from Mr. Weaver, requesting legislation to authorize the mayor or his designee to enter into contract with M-Tech Company and Maintainer for the purchase of a Maintainer utility service truck at the water distribution garage at the state bid pricing of $134,799. This request is an emergency in order to facilitate timeliness in the purchase of equipment necessary for daily operations of the utility department. Funds are available in the utility budget. Do you have any questions about this? Hearing none, do I hear a motion to call for this?
I'll make a motion to call for
Carol Fry,
I will second it.
and second by Carla DeBevick. All in favor?
it. Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Do you have any miscellaneous discussion for utilities? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion.
First by Carol Fry,
I'll second it.
and second by Carla DeBevick. We are adjourned at 6:15.
Okay, next up is finance and personnel and Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is Monday, November 16th. The time is 6:18, and we are beginning the meeting of Finance and Personnel in the Active Adult Center. All members of my committee are present, as well as all council people and guests as noted on my meeting sheet. We have 8 pieces of legislation on the agenda for tonight. The first is ordinance number 136, 2020, titled Appropriation Water Fund. And, it's appropriating $10,583.30 from an unappropriated item of the water fund to the capital budget of the water fund. This is money for a shoring, what is that called?
Trenching and shoring equipment.
Shoring equipment. And, we discussed that last week. The second piece of legislation we're gonna vote on tonight is ordinance number 139, 2020. This is an authorization for a payment to Browse McDowell, $100, and the other and the other was for $4,725 for a total of $9,625. This was for the paperwork for the CIC. Our third piece of legislation is ordinance number 140, 2020, and this is an appropriation for the local coronavirus relief fund. This is, there are three amounts in the legislation. The first is $3,328, and that amount is for PPE for the fire department. The second amount in the ordinance is $18,156. That is for laptops and modems for the police cars. And the third amount in this ordinance is $909,251.67. That amount is for fire payroll. The fourth piece of legislation that we have on the agenda for tonight is ordinance number 141, 2020. This is also an appropriation for COVID-19. It's for the PSGP fund. We've received money in the amount of $500,000 for use for our police department, and this is from Summit County COVID-19 PSGP fund. The next piece of legislation, number 5, is resolution number 142, 2020, titled Summit Akron Solid Waste Management Authority Solid Waste Management Plan. We all received a copy of this plan, a booklet, an executive summary. The sixth piece of legislation is ordinance number 143, 2020. This is disposal of miscellaneous items, and it is items in the municipal building, and they are going to be sold or listed on Gov Deals, and they are like chairs, file cabinets, old printers, etc., which are no longer in use. The next piece of legislation is resolution number 144, 2020. This is accommodation for Barberton City Schools. And this is a resolution of the Council and Administration of the City of Barberton commending and showing appreciation to the Barberton City School District, including the Barberton Board of Education, administrators, faculty, and students for working through the challenges associated with the current COVID-19 pandemic. The last piece of legislation on the agenda for this evening is ordinance number 145, 2020. This piece of legislation is to enter into contract with Medical Mutual. This is an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a one-year contract with Medical Mutual of Ohio through a partnership with Summit County Health Connection for employee benefits, which include medical, prescription, dental, and vision coverage, beginning January 1st, 2021 through December 31st, 2021. There was no increase in the premiums, and the coverage is the same. Does anybody have any questions or comments regarding what we're going to be voting on tonight? All right, hearing none, does anybody have any miscellaneous items for discussion in finance? No? Therefore, hearing no comments, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Motion made by Mrs. Angela,
I'll second.
seconded by Mrs. DeBevick, and we are adjourned at 6:24 p.m.
Okay, I think we're just gonna go right into our meeting. Good. All right. Okay, this is a regular legislative meeting of the Bartlett City Council. Today is Monday, November 16th, 2020. It is 6:25 p.m. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by the invocation by me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity of bringing us together to face the issues and concerns of our city. Grant us the guidance to unite and share the wisdom we need to become the best community we can be. Please safeguard our brave men and women who protect us at home and abroad. We ask that you work through us and strengthen our hearts and minds in making positive decisions as they come before us. Amen. Clerk, please call the roll.
Mrs. Angela.
Here.
Mrs. Coburn.
Here.
Mrs. DeVette.
Here.
Mrs. Fry.
Here.
Mr. Greer.
Here.
Mr. Griffin.
Here.
Mr. Hyde.
Here.
Mr. Jacobs.
Here.
Okay, Council Rule 103 states that the regular and committee meetings of the whole meeting shall be at 7:30 p.m. Since we are starting earlier than this, we need to invoke Council Rule 702. Do I have a motion? Mrs. DeVette.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that we invoke Council Rule 702.
Thank you. And Mr. Hyde.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second that motion to invoke 702.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. DeVette, second by Mr. Hyde, to invoke Council Rule 702 to suspend Council Rule 103. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, next is the approval of the minutes of the regular legislative meeting. Mrs. DeVette.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion for the approval of the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, October 26, 2020, as presented.
Thank you. And Mr. Hyde.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second Mrs. Bevick's motion on approval of the minutes.
Thank you. It was moved by Mrs. DeVette and second by Mr. Hyde to approve the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, October 25th, 2020, as presented. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are adopted. Acceptance of the finance report. Mrs. DeVette. Excuse me, that would be Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the acceptance of the Finance Department report for the month of October 2020 as presented.
Thank you. And Mrs. Angelos. Oh, Mrs. DeVette. I've got Mark Brown here.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on approval of the finance report.
Okay, it was moved by Mrs. Fry and second by Mrs. DeVette to approve the Finance Department report for the month of October 2020. And October 2020 as presented. Did we do August?
Yeah.
We did August, didn't we? I don't know why it's on here as August. Okay. I'll start all over. It was moved by Mrs. Fry and second by Mrs. DeVette to approve the Finance Department's report for the month of October 2020 as presented. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Finance report is accepted. All right. Okay. Petitions and claims.
There are none.
Matters requested.
They've been passed out.
Citizens addressing council.
I received them.
Okay. First reading of ordinances and resolutions.
Resolution number 133, 2020, presented by Mrs. Angela, titled Zoning Permit Moratorium. A resolution imposing a moratorium of no longer than 1 year of the issuing of zoning permits for entertainment device arcades, used car lots, mini warehouses, limited indoor storage, and dollar stores within the city of Arlington, and declared an emergency. And this is the first reading only. Ordinance number 134, 2020, presented by Mrs. Silver, entitled Litigation Assistance Designated Park Street. An ordinance designating City of Marvin agents for the administration of the city's litigation assistance accusation demolition project funded under the Hazardous Mitigation Grant Program, HMGP, as a result of federal declaration FEMA Drive 4360 Ohio, and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Cover.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Coburn's motion to suspend.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Cover and a second by Mrs. Fry to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mr. Hyde,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Cover.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 134, 2020.
And Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Coburn's motion to adopt.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Cover and a second by Mrs. Fry to adopt ordinance 134, 2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Hyde,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Ordinance number 135, 2020, presented by Mrs. Coburn, entitled Litigation Assistance Designee, 15th Street Northwest. An ordinance designating City of Marvin agents for the administration of the city's litigation assistance accusation demolition project funded under the Hazardous Mitigation Grant Program, HMGP, as a result of federal declaration FEMA Drive 4360 Ohio, and declared an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Cover.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Coburn's motion to suspend.
A motion was made by Mrs. Coburn and second by Mrs. Fry to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Hyde,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that ordinance number 135, 2020 be adopted.
Thank you, and Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Coburn's motion to adopt.
Motion was made by Mrs. Coburn and second by Mrs. Fry to adopt ordinance number 135, 2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Hyde,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Ordinance number 136, 2020, presented by Mrs. Fry, titled Appropriation Water Fund. An ordinance appropriating $10,583.30 from the unappropriated items of the water fund to the capital budget of the water fund and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
And Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second that motion for suspension.
Motion was made by Mrs. Fry, second by Mrs. Coburn to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Hyde,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 136-2020.
And Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second that motion for adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Fry and second by Mrs. Coburn to adopt ordinance number 136, 2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mr. Gabriel,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Devitt,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mr. Hyde.
Yes.
Ordinance number 137, 2020, presented by Mrs. Devitt, titled Enacting the Code of Ordinances. An ordinance enacting the Code of Ordinances for the City of Arlington, revising, amending, restating, codifying, compiling certain existing general ordinances and the political subdivision dealing with subjects embraced in such code of ordinances and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
And Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. DeBevick's motion on suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. DeBevick, second by Mr. Greer to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mr. Hyde,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mr. Gabriel,
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 137, 2020.
And Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. DeBevick's motion for adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. DeBevick and second by Mr. Greer to adopt ordinance number 137, 2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Hyde,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Ordinance number 138, 2020, presented by Mr. Hyde, titled Transfer of Property, Christian Healthcare Ministries, Inc. An ordinance authorizing the city of Arlington to convey parcel 0101927 to Christian Healthcare Ministries, Inc. via quitclaim deed with protection by the city of Arlington of a permanent easement enclosing the Memorial Cemetery and declared an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mr. Hyde.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
And Mr. Jaber.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mr. Hyde's motion to suspend.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mr. Hyde, second by Mr. Jaber to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Mr. Hyde.
Thank you, Mr. President. Christian Healthcare Ministries has acted in good faith throughout this whole project, and suspension should be warranted.
Thank you. Anyone else? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mr. Hyde.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mr. Hyde.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 138, 2020.
And Mr. Jaber.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mr. Hyde's motion to adopt.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mr. Hyde, second by Mr. Jaber to adopt ordinance number 138, 2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Hyde,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Ordinance number 139, 2020, presented by Mrs. Frye, titled Authorized Payment to Ross McDowell. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Finance to pay two separate invoices to Ross McDowell in the amounts of $4,725 and $4,900 and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Frye.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Frye's motion on suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Frye and second by Mrs. DeBevick to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Hyde,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mr.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 139, 2020.
And Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Fry and second by Mrs. DeBevick to adopt ordinance number 139, 2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Hyde,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Freeman.
Yes.
Ordinance number 140, 2020, presented by Mrs. Fry, title appropriation, local coronavirus relief fund. An ordinance appropriating $3,328 from the unappropriated item of the local coronavirus relief fund to the operation and maintenance budget of the local coronavirus relief fund, appropriating $18,156 from the unappropriated item of the local coronavirus relief fund to the capital budget of the local coronavirus relief fund, and appropriating $909,251.67 from the unappropriated item of the local coronavirus relief fund to the personnel service budget of the local coronavirus relief fund and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule is required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Fry and second by Mrs. DeBevick to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Hyde,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 140-2020.
Thank you, and Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Fry and second by Mrs. DeBevick to adopt ordinance number 140-2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Hyde,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Ordinance number 141, 2020, presented by Mrs. Fry, title appropriation, COVID-19 PSGP fund. An ordinance appropriating $500,000 from the unappropriated item of the Summit County COVID-19 PSGP fund to the personnel service of the Summit County COVID-19 PSGP fund and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
And Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Fry, second by Mrs. DeBevick to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mr. Hyde,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 141-2020.
And Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on adoption.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Fry, second by Mrs. DeBevick to adopt ordinance number 141-2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Hyde,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Resolution number 142, 2020, presented by Mrs. Fry, titled Summit Akron Solid Waste Management Authority, Solid Waste Management Plan. A resolution by the Barberton City Council of the City of Barberton to adopt the Summit County Solid Waste Management Plan by the Summit Akron Solid Waste Management Authority, DBA Free Works, the city of Arlington.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mrs. DeBeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Fry, second by Mrs. DeBevick, to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mrs. Levitt.
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mr. Hyde.
Yes.
Mr. Taylor.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of resolution number 142-2020.
Thank you, and Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Fry and second by Mrs. DeBevick to adopt resolution number 142-2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Taylor.
Yes.
Mr. Hyde.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Mrs. Levitt.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Ordinance number 143-2020, presented by Mrs. Fry, titled Disposal of Miscellaneous Items. An ordinance authorizing the city of Arlington to dispose of miscellaneous items in the municipal building or to sell these items on gov deals, including but not limited to chairs, file cabinets, old printers, etc., which are no longer in use and declared an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
And Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Fry and second by Mrs. DeBevick to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Hyde.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mrs. Levitt.
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mr. Taylor.
Yes.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 143-2020.
Thank you, and Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Fry and second by Mrs. DeBevick to adopt ordinance number 143-2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Mr. Taylor.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Mrs. Levitt.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mr. Hyde.
Yes.
Resolution number 144-2020, presented by Mrs. Fry, titled Commendation Barberton City Schools. A resolution of the Council and Administration of the City of Arlington commending and showing appreciation to the Barberton City School District, including the Barberton Board of Education, administrators, faculty, and students for working through the challenges associated with the current COVID-19 pandemic.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Fry, second by Mrs. DeBevick to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Levitt.
Yes.
Mr. Hyde.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mr. Taylor.
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of resolution number 144-2020.
Thank you, and Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on adoption.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Fry, second by Mrs. DeBevick to adopt resolution number 144-2020. Are there any remarks? Mr. Hyde.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't know if anybody saw what the school district published today, but through November 16th today, there are currently 4 active student cases and 3 active staff cases. There are 7 resolved student cases and 3 resolved staff cases. That has got to be the lowest numbers of any district in this state. I'm not speaking for it, but that is quite remarkable given what numbers we see posted daily by the state health department. So I can't congratulate the school district enough for the job they're doing.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes. And do not see the numbers that Councilman Hyde just brought up, but, you know, I don't know if there's a perfect plan out there. This all started, if you remember, I said, you know, we're constantly on conference calls, getting updates from multiple agencies. We're all just trying to figure it out, right? And, you know, I think our school system, every employee, including the students, has done a tremendous job, no matter what their job duties are or description, you know, from the entry-level job all the way up to the administration has done a tremendous job to keep themselves safe, the students safe, families safe. And you see in other districts, there's lawsuits and they're flip-flopping and they're not sure what they're gonna do. They're gonna stay home, is there gonna be a hybrid, or they're gonna be in class? And I think that our school system, and this is a tight-knit community, I think our school system has done a tremendous job keeping everyone safe, keeping the students learning. And again, we're all just trying to figure this out. I don't know if there's a perfect plan, but they've done a pretty amazing job. So my head goes off to them. You know, should have included the students in this as well, because they've had to deal with a lot of adversity, as have the teachers. You know, everything that they've done over the years in the classrooms, and all the staff, they've had to change and accommodate mandates, the different rules that they've had to follow. So I'm just very proud of the school system and everyone that's associated.
Are there any other remarks? Mrs. Cole?
Yes, the absenteeism is next to nothing in the way we have it set up now. The kids that are at home are reporting in like they should, and we have not got the problem with absenteeism this year. It's just, this is a fantastic accommodation that we're doing for them. They've really worked it out.
Okay, any others? Mr. Greer?
Thank you, Mr. President. With 2 children in the public school system, 1 in middle school and 1 in elementary, they're both remote. And I didn't tell the teachers this directly like I wanted to, but I just wanted to thank them, the remote ones, that at least my children, I couldn't be happier with the communication between the teachers and my parents from the remote side of things. And I sit there and listen to the teachers throughout the day, try to corral the kids if they seem veering off. And the technology that the Barberton City Schools implemented, where they can see what the kids are doing on the screen as well as through the webcam, has been pretty awesome to see, especially when I come from a technology background. So I just wanted to put that out there from the remote learning side, that they're doing an awesome job, and I definitely will support this.
Okay, any other remarks? Mrs. Amy?
Thank you, Mr. President. My daughter is an 8th grade teacher in the Barberton system, and it's keeping the morale up of the students along with the teachers. That's number one, and the school has done a fantastic job by doing little games. And, you know, the children have to stay in one classroom where the teachers move all around. And to keep that morale up and to keep them focused, my hat's off to the administration and the teachers that work very hard to make the children understand what we're going through. So it's really remarkable that the morale is pretty doggone good up there in the schools.
Okay. Any other remarks? Mr. Hyde?
One last thing before we vote, go Magics.
Not really.
Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Greer?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes,
Mrs. Hanwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Frye?
Yes.
Mr. Irvin?
Yes.
Mr. Hyde?
Yes.
Mrs. Devetter?
yes,
Ordinance number 145, 2020, submitted by Mrs. Frye, title and contract, medical legal. An ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a one-year contract with Medical Mutual of Ohio, MMO, through a partnership with Summit County Health Protection for employee benefits, which include medical, prescription, dental, and vision coverage beginning January 1st, 2021 through December 31st, 2021.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, Mrs. DeBeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Fry, second by Mrs. DeBevick to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mr. Jager?
Yes.
Mr. Greer?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Gilbert?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick?
Yes.
Mr. Hyde?
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 145-2020.
Thank you, Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on adoption.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Fry and second by Mrs. DeBevick to adopt ordinance number 145-2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Hyde?
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Gilbert?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mr. Greer?
Yes.
Mr. Jager?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Earlier this evening, the Rules Committee invoked Council Rule 702 to suspend Council Rules 302, which is, it was late, 304, which is, it's not on the agenda, and 401, that it was not called for at the committee the whole meeting, to add the following ordinance to tonight's, following resolution, to tonight's agenda. Resolution number 146-2020, presented by Mr. Griffin, titled Extend House Bill 197. A resolution to urge Governor DeWine and the Ohio legislature to extend the deadline for operating public meetings electronically and declare an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mr. Griffin.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to invoke Council Rule 702 to suspend Council Rule 302, 304, and 401.
We already did that.
Already did that. Okay, so I'd like to invoke the rule as required by suspend the rule of 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter.
Okay. And Mr. Hyde.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the rule on suspension of the charter by Mr. Griffin.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mr. Griffin and second by Mr. Hyde to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mr. Hyde?
Yes.
Mr. Jager?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mr. Greer?
Yes.
Mrs. Gilbert?
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick?
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mr. Griffin.
I move that we adopt resolution number 146-2020.
Thank you. And Mr. Hyde.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second the motion to adopt.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Griffin and second by Mr. Hyde to adopt resolution number 146-2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. DeBevick?
Yes.
Mrs. Gilbert?
Yes.
Mr. Greer?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mr. Jager?
Yes.
Mr. Hyde?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
And the first readings.
Second reading of ordinances and resolutions.
There are none.
Third reading of ordinances and resolution.
There are none.
Appointments,
I have none.
miscellaneous and unfinished business.
The first one would be the rules. Adopting the approval of the change to the rules governing the council of the city of Arlington to section 3, request for legislative appointments, adding rule 305, appointments to boards and commissions.
Okay, Mr. Griffin.
They make a motion to adopt the rules with changes.
Okay, I make a motion to adopt the rules with the changes.
And Mr. Hyde.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the motion to adopt the approval of changes.
Thank you. It was moved by Mr. Griffin and second by Mr. Hyde to approve the change of the rules of governing the city governing the council of the city of Barberton to section 3, requesting the legislation and appointments, adding rules 305, appointments to boards and commission. Are there any remarks? Mrs. DeBeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just would like to thank Mr. Hyde for following through with that. I appreciate it.
Any other remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Those minutes are adopted.
Next week, I will have current rules, updated rules for anybody to copy this.
Okay.
And I have a new liquor license for, Wasabi Express LLC, DBA Wasabi Express, 245th Street Southeast. A copy was given to Mr. Griffin, Chief Morber, and Mrs. Doherty, and I received no objections.
Okay. Okay, communications from the mayor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll give you an update on the COVID cases. So Ohio, the state of Ohio has reported today 305,364. That's 50,390 new cases in 1 week. 3 weeks ago, we had just over 200,000 cases in the state. So the number of cases is dramatically skyrocketed. Throughout the state, so we have 88 counties in the state of Ohio. 1 county is at the lowest level. Currently, that's yellow, level 1. 19 counties are at level 2, which is orange, and 68 counties are at the heightened red level, level 3. No counties are at purple yet. So what does the different levels mean? I'll just go through the one that some counties in have been in. The red level, which 68 counties are in. It's a public emergency, very high exposure and spread, limit activities as much as possible. No counties are at purple or high slope. The governor is scheduled to address the public again this Thursday, as he did last week. It's anticipated that additional mandates and rules will be coming down. Here in Summit County, the cases have been logged earlier today at 10,924. This is just over 2,000 new cases since last week. Summit County over the last 7 days has averaged 266.6 new cases over the last 7 days. This time last week, if you remember, they reported 163 new cases on average for the previous 7 days. 2 weeks ago, it was down to 72 cases on average. So it's gone from 72 cases 2 weeks ago on average to 163 cases on average, and today 266 on average. So it's very important that we continue to follow all the rules and mandates, as difficult as it is, especially with the holidays coming up, because we're seeing the numbers just skyrocket. Talking to Councilman Hyde earlier today, talked to some other business owners, and there's some businesses that are following the rules. They've got no complaints, and if they had a complaint, it did not materialize into a violation. Yet the state, because of these rising numbers, could make some rules and orders that affect businesses, even though they're following the rules, because you have some businesses in that industry that are not following the rules. So it's so important that we continue to do everything that's being asked of us, even if we don't agree with it, even if we don't believe in it, even if it's troublesome and bothersome, because these numbers are going up. Lives are at stake. This is serious. So we'll keep you updated on those numbers as more information comes out. Kind of associated with that, the unpredictable weather this past week. We saw this earlier in the spring. High winds, trees were down, power lines down. Just so council knows, we addressed this immediately. Working with our first responders and others, we closed roads with our street department. Started working with Ohio Edison to restore power. So there were a number of customers in town, mostly on the west side, near west side of town, not power overnight. That was restored earlier this morning. I do appreciate council passing ordinance 134 and 135, 2020. The working alongside FEMA for Arthur Avenue and 15th Street the city has made so much positive and proactive movements forward in mitigating stormwater. And working with FEMA, these are 2 examples, including 3 examples with 14th Street. So this is just a continuation in the right direction, so I appreciate council's approval for that, and we'll get moving as quickly as possible. We're continuing with our business retention and expansion meetings, as well as working with site selectors, developers, and financiers on possible future developments and projects here in the city. So, which obviously is job growth in the city. There's a lot of developers and site selectors that are moving forward with plans. But there's still a ton of unknowns moving forward in the next year. So it's like they're getting their T's crossed and their I's getting ready to dot them, but not just yet. So we're working with them. So if we can have these projects materialize, they'll move forward very quickly. As I mentioned last week, I want to put a informational PowerPoint presentation together for council. That will be next week. It's going to include alternatives to generating revenue since the property tax levy failed. It's going to review some of our fee schedules that will impact the community in a very positive way. With this, we've listened to the public, we've listened to city council, and we've conducted research. So this will all come together next week with the presentation. I just want you to know that we have been listening to you, have been listening to business owners, we've been listening to people in the neighborhood, and our residents, and the city council. So that will be put together next week, and it will really change the operations and impact our community in a much more positive way. So, and just finally, Councilwoman Friday, thank you. We reached out to Summit County Health. They did send a package of information. So I'm trying to get them to send it to me via email so it's easier to disperse because there's a ton of pamphlets and different
I think
information.
that he's going to do a report. That's what we had agreed upon. That he was going to email you the facts and figures, so.
The information that was shared, I shared it with the health board the other week, 2 weeks ago. But it's just a little easier when it's email, so thank you for that. So with that, that's my report.
Thank you. Anything else from council? Mr. Hyde?
Thank you, Mr. President. I did meet with the mayor this morning. Being the manager of a business that's in the crosshairs of possible closures and going through it for months on end earlier this year, the purpose of me meeting with the mayor was a nice discussion of what kind of resources workers in Barberton and citizens of Barberton might be able to take advantage of, how certain funds might be able to be moved, how nonprofits might be able to help. This is the time where there is no PUA money if people get thrown on unemployment. The Fed has been gridlocked, much to they can't get out of their own way. The governor doesn't really speak very much on what he's going to do, but I really encourage anybody on the council, if there's ideas, to contact the administration if it's any idea, just because I would love for us to have, when I spoke with the mayor, a folder this thick of a contingency plan to help our citizens, and hopefully it sits on his desk and collects dust, and God willing, we never have to implement it. But if there's any sort of idea you might have, there were some I spoke of with him that, can't be done. That's fine. I didn't know that. There's some that we might be able to, but I don't have, personally, going through this with my business, I don't put much faith in the Fed. And as we all know, Barberton always looks out for each other. So any ideas you have, send emails, talk to everybody, and let's just look after each other. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Griffin?
Thank you, Mr. President. Thursday, February the 11th, Lake Anawai is having their virtual reverse raffle and silent auction. I know, this organization is hurting just like everybody else, and this is completely different. 2020, we'll never forget it. There's a big need for this building and why. And we have tickets for $125 per couple. If you wanna donate something, raffle tickets, make a basket, something like that, you can do that. You can purchase online. They got instructions to do the virtual bidding online, and you still have the $4,000 prize for someone that wins, at the end, there wins what is it, raffle there, yeah. At the end there, the last man standing, Like I said, I have 4 tickets, well, 3, because I gotta buy one, I'm sure. So if anyone's interested, they can get a ticket from me, or they can check with the Y, And all this money goes to, we don't turn any kids down. They get either a free subscription, or the family gets a reduced, something that they can afford to pay. So I think this is something that's very needed for our community. And the Y doesn't get any CARES Act money. They don't get zero. So they're just operating on a shoestring and from donations and stuff like that. So we appreciate whatever anyone can do for us. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Any department heads? Okay, I have a couple things. Starting next Monday, we will not be entering in the door that we normally do. We are going to enter from Hopkinton Avenue, that door right in the back, which is the middle door, okay? There's 3 doors on Hopkinton, right where the chiefs point. That's where we're all gonna start entering. That'll eliminate people walking all the way down. You can walk right into this place. So that's everybody, that's council and department heads, okay? All right, another thing is, last Saturday, we had our 11th annual Raking the Lawn Day, and we broke our record, our old record. We did 16 yards. This year we did 18 yards with a handful of kids. They worked really hard. I'm so proud of them. What's really good about it, they work hard, but they're very respectful for the people we're dealing with, and they're very courteous to everybody. And that really reflects very well on the city and Coach Gatto and the football team. So I'm very proud of them, and I'm looking forward to the 12th end. So that's all for me. So only thing else left is stay safe, okay? I call this meeting adjourned at 7:12. Oh, excuse me.
Thank
We
you.
have a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that we adjourn.
Okay, and Mr. Hyde.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the motion to adjourn.
Thank you. It was moved by Mrs. DeBevick, second by Mr. Hyde, that we adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Now we are adjourned at 7:12.
How you doing, Sean? Hey, how are you, sir? Good to see you always. They sent your arcing tree on. Did they see it at all?